You're listening to the Insurance Podcast with Pete Tessier and Kurt Wyatt. Brought to you by First Insurance Funding of Canada, the innovator in insurance payments.
Hey everyone, as you see this, you'll realize, hey, this is the first video version of the podcast. So if you're listening to us on the podcast, guess what? You can find us on YouTube because this is also being broadcast in video. Just search the Insurance Podcast on YouTube and check it out. Kurt, we decided to do this because we're going down a fun rabbit hole that we never, ever thought we'd really touch, right? And that is
absolutely
talking to someone about a children's book around weather, climate, and insurance.
Yeah, for sure, Pete. And it's probably the best one to start a video on, because this is all about illustrations. It's about painting a picture of what is happening, and it's not just environment; it's weather. It's all of the above. And Nick and the team have partnered with two very talented individuals that we get to meet here. And what I think it was going to be maybe a 20 or 30-minute talk turned into a little longer, but actually it's super delightful to hear what they're doing, to hear the challenges that go into building something like what they're doing. It's really very insightful. And I think it all ties back into what we live every day, which is managing risk and managing people's emotions as it pertains to the sad part of when things don't actually go the way we hope them to. That there are times when there's big storms and people's lives get disrupted. And Nick and the team are trying to prepare people for that.
Yeah. Look, we've got Nick Lamparelli, a great friend from Insurance Nerds. We've got his friend Cyrena Arnold, who is a meteorologist and now an author. And we've got the nephew of the legend himself, Mr. Hard Market, Curtis Goldsborough, Landon, coming on, who did the illustrator, to talk about what it took to make this book. And Cyrena's done another book called The Weather Story, and this is a continuation. And now it gets into some really interesting ideas and concepts around weather, why it's happening, so that kids can understand the world around them a little bit better. Speaking of understanding the world around you a little bit better, it's time to check out First Insurance Funding of Canada and FirstPay, which is first easy to implement suite of APIs. So what you can do is you can integrate all methods of payment into your workflow, app, website, or portal and increase your efficiency and obviously close business faster. So provide bespoke payments at the point of sale and close your business faster while improving your client experience. And look, you can trust the secure and in-market solutions from the leader in insurance payments, First Insurance Funding of Canada. Kurt, the other part, I think, which is really interesting here, is Nick's going to talk about some of the underlying purpose and why, as someone who has worked in the cat loss area with his projects and stuff and is seen as a bit of an industry leader around it, why it's important to go forward with this message and this education model.
Yeah, you know what? Hey, I don't mind saying it. I can see that Nick has a little bit of gray hair like I do, and Pete, well, you have a lot more than Nick and I. But I think that where Nick's coming now is saying that there's a bit of a long game here. That things in insurance don't happen overnight. We know that, and that's a good thing. It's a stable industry. And the message that they're working on is a long game message. It's about education. It's about removing some of those fears, and good on them. And speaking about dealing with managing risk, we also have another sponsor, which is Take on Risk, the MGA that specializes in niche markets, hard to place or unusually complex commercial risk. They turn hard risk into smart coverage the old-fashioned way. They underwrite it. And when you're on their website, which is taycon.ca, check out Drum, the digital rating underwriting manager for your automated submissions. Bang the drum with Take On. And guys, this is why should we keep you any longer from seeing what is going to be our first ever video putt production, and enjoy seeing our guests. I say seeing because you will see them in addition to hearing them.
So as you heard in the intro, we're going big today. There's 5 people on this podcast, and we might as well introduce everyone. But let's start with our author, Cyrena Arnold. Welcome to the show, Cyrena, and thanks for joining the Insurance Podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a real pleasure to be here.
Hey, and we also have friend of the podcast in general. Well, if you don't mind the Bruins, he's a great guy. And if you don't like the Bruins, well, he's still a great guy. Nick Lamparelli. Nick, thanks for coming back on with us. This is fun to see you again.
Fun to see you too as well. And thank you for that wonderful intro.
There you go. And we also have Landon Goldsborough, and who is the illustrator of this book in conjunction with Cyrena. So Landon, thanks for joining us too. All the audience is going, how does this ever relate to insurance? So, Cyrena, Landon, let's jump into sort of where you guys came from with this project and sort of how you've arrived here. And then we'll start getting into the details of it and why it matters.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in and go first. So I'm a meteorologist, and I knew that I was going to be a meteorologist since the time I was really young, like 5 years old. I'm going to say healthy obsession with the weather growing up. We're not going to say it crossed the line at all. Went to the University of Oklahoma, storm chased, just was like all in on weather. And so I've done some really cool things. I've worked with NASA contractors. I've installed weather stations on the Alaska tundra. I was the director of the world famous Mount Washington Observatory and got to do some stuff on TV, and then actually found myself in insurance. And so it was this really interesting thing where there was a need. There was a need in the market where my sister-in-law came to me and said, my niece was really afraid of storms. Hey, you're a meteorologist, talk to her. What can you do to help her? And I said, you know what? All she needs is a good book. Like anytime there's a fear or something like that, kids just need education. And so I went to the bookstores and I looked and I looked and I looked, and I was really disappointed with everything that I saw. There weren't things that were accurate. I didn't want to, this isn't like, God stomping his feet in the sky is what thunder is. No, thunder is like expanding air from lightning, and kids need to know that. And so I wanted something that was realistic and accurate. And so when I didn't see a need for it in the market, I said, well, let's write it. And so the first children's book I did was The Weather Story. And this next one that's going to be coming out on June 1st, The Hurricane Story, is just a sequel to that, because I think it's got just as much of a need in the world.
That's super interesting. Cyrena, a good friend of mine is a dentist, and during the pandemic, he dove into writing kids' books on dentistry, right? Because again, just like you said, the fear of going in and seeing the dentist. And I think one of the things he found was that, especially with kids, is that the story is one thing, but the illustrations, like the fact that, these kids dive into the story through what they see and the emotion that brings out. And Landon, that kind of brings it around to you. Like, how did the two of you meet? And Landon, what's your background in illustrating books like this?
Yeah, so I was introduced to Cyrena through Nick, and Nick was introduced to me via my uncle, Curtis Goldsborough, who is an insurance guru of sorts. And so
the legend, let's just say the legend, Curtis.
Yeah. And so I've worked with him a lot in past years doing graphic design. That's what I do. Graphic design, illustration. I've done a number of projects with him. And so that's kind of how I got connected with Cyrena in a way. So yeah. And my background is not in weather. And so this book has been a really interesting learning experience for me as well. And so we can kind of because it's a children's book, but to some degree, I mean, these are concepts that everyone's going to be learning. Adults are going to be learning the same things that they're reading, that their kids are learning. And so it's been really exciting for me so far to learn these concepts, and also work on kind of illustrating them in a way that kids can understand at the same time. So been really good so far.
And just to sort of dive a little deeper here, because of that opportunity I had to learn through my friend, I found that he said how the relationship he formed with the illustrator, so that to get like how Cyrena feels about something, and to get you to sort of dive in. Cyrena's smiling here and laughing a little because clearly there's some stories here. Either of you can answer this. Is how's it been as far as like you're neither of you are in the same city, I'm assuming, and yet you're trying to collaborate on something, and there's a lot of emotion that goes into this.
It's the reason I smile is because it's like you think there'd be this like massive story. It is just, it's working like so well. Like it's clicking.
There
And
you
when I
go.
did
Yeah.
the weather story, I illustrated it myself. And so the whole book doing it myself took me 11 months. They're like hand painted watercolors. I wrapped up the last book March of 2020. Timing is everything. And so I couldn't even get like the images scanned in, and it was all this craziness. And so when I was approached about doing the sequel with Nick and with Insurance Nerds, he like offered, hey, let's get an illustrator. And I jumped at the chance because that it's not my forte. I did my best with it. And after seeing some samples that Landon did and talking about the story, and we've had meetings where we've storyboarded it out, and he's given his input and ideas and the drafts and the things that he's coming back with. I mean, the hurricane story is cool, and I love that I wrote it, and I'm really excited, but the impact, what Landon's doing with the illustrations is like putting the exponent on all the work that I've done with the book up until now, because that's what's going to grab kids' attention. That's what's going to sink it in. That's what's going to drive it home. And like, we just couldn't have a better partner in this like little adventure.
So there's the part I didn't talk about is Nick's with Insurance Nerds. Like, didn't give you your proper plug. So Nick, you bring the insurance aspect of this in. And for those who don't know a little bit about your background, I think it's really important to sort of bring that you've specialized in a lot of work around cat losses. So this is sort of a bit of a passion project for you too, I would imagine. Like, how did you sort of, take the idea of weather, kids, insurance, and decide there's a bigger purpose to this?
I did not. Cyrena did. So when Cyrena published the weather story, I remember interviewing her on that book. I remember buying the book. I remember reading the book to my kids, and my kids have a whole bunch of questions on the weather. Naturally, I think all kids do. So when Cyrena brought up, when we were catching up last fall, and she brought up the concept of the hurricane story, and that she already had it written, she was, committed to a sequel, I made a hard push to try to be the publisher for that particular book, because one, how often do we as insurance professionals complain that younger people do not understand insurance? They don't get exposed to it until they, buy a vehicle or they graduate from college. And by then, all of these different stereotypes have fit in. So that's point number one was, wow, like in the long run, we can make a connection to what insurance does or what insurance is and how it's related to all of the things around us. But I think secondarily, this is the kind of title that I think could potentially be timeless. Kids are constantly asking questions about the weather, right? So as Cyrena and I were sort of whiteboarding some ideas around what is it that we were going to do with this, and then we met Landon as well, we started to come up with concepts around like, okay, well, clearly we don't have to stop at the hurricane story. If kids have questions about weather, they probably have questions about tornado and hail and lightning and snow and how does all of that occur. But Cyrena cleverly had a character in the first book that we're bringing into the second book. And so there's the opportunity to kind of expand this to animation, to additional sources, to really educate beyond just the insurance public, just kids in general. Yes, I will do my best to kind of tie it to insurance, but we are in no way limiting the market size to this to insurance professionals. We're looking at this as a much bigger opportunity, but selfishly, I am looking at this as a way to try to connect to a younger audience, connect insurance to them for what it is that we professionals need in North America. We need more younger folks exposed to insurance. Insurance is a boring topic. Hurricanes is not. This is a perfect vehicle for us to make that bridge.
Fair enough. And I think there's a little bit of a noble piece to that is really important. I was just going to make the quick joke that whenever I see a kid setting up a lemonade stand, I'm going to totally think about it with insurance eyes now. That's a
How he needs liability because he could get someone sick, right?
Yeah. But Landon, your uncle is hands down one of the most creative and innovative expressionists of insurance. And it's something I think the industry itself struggles with when it comes to presenting itself, not sort of talking about insurance and boring everyone to sleep. When you started working with Cyrena and Nick and thinking about imagery for through an insurance lens, how did you sort of process the ideas and what Nick just said and the concepts behind it? Because it's not the easiest thing to do to necessarily, maybe the story tells it, but what about imagery? Did you have to pull yourself back from being almost like fearful in the imagery and trying to sort of have this fire and brimstone biblical effect and going into the act of God? like what was the creative process like? God, I talk a lot before I ask a question.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're describing. Like, I did feel myself, itching to make something look, as realistic as it could be, because that's what I see just photos online, and I'm just trying to make it as realistic as possible. But at the same time, it's a children's book, and so the imagery should, to some degree, while we want to be, teaching kids things that are real, there's an element of whimsy that I'm trying to introduce into the art, and it has to be something that kids want to look at. Kids don't just want to look at fire and brimstone or just things being destroyed and that kind of thing. While that is reality, it's the story and the character is supposed to be something that's comforting and reassuring, almost to a point. And so as we kind of progress through the course of the hurricane, at the beginning of the story is just kind of how the hurricane starts to form, and then by the end, the hurricane will be moving on, and there's an end point. And so it's not something that we're trying to scare kids with. So I think with the art, it's tough, but I'm trying to make it simple and exciting and colorful.
And I'll be honest, Landon's not giving himself enough credit right now, because one of the things that was really important to me in this book is that we teach kids some really hard physics processes. Believe it or not, this book is going to teach very young children cloud physics and about condensation nuclei and really critical parts of how hurricanes are formed. In a year, by the way, this upcoming forecast to be one of the worst on record, which we can talk about as well. There's no better time or need for this book, and kids are going to be learning some incredibly important processes about why these storms form. And Landon has the challenge of being the one that has to illustrate it. I mean, how do you talk about Sahara sand blowing over the Atlantic Ocean, creating condensation nuclei for warm, moist ocean waters to cause condensation to form on that forms these clouds that become hurricanes? Like, this is a critical and key piece of how hurricanes form, and kids are going to know that. Kids are going to know that.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I think that, well, let's face it, we just watched record rainstorm. It was in Dubai, right, where they were seeding and talk about sand and seeding and things like that. I mean, it's very relative to right now. And Nick, speaking of being sort of relative to this story, is like, how is it that for yourself, I mean, you're living in Florida. I can hopefully tell that to the audience under witness protection. Just kidding. But do you find that your kids living there and you guys having, I believe, moved from another state, that this is a real story, and I remember being in school and we had to do drills where we went under the desk and stuff. And now you're living in a state that does see hurricanes and tornadoes. And do you think that, for yourself, it maybe hits home a little more because you have young kids and you are living in somewhere that this is a reality?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. It's hurricanes and alligators. Like, it's the reality here. You have to have those conversations all the time. Like, you just, those conversations never end. The kids are still talking about Hurricane Ian when we went through it, and they're constant, and they're talking about it in school because the schools are trying to educate the kids on hurricane safety. things like that. So it is a part of the day to day, and it will be part of our distribution strategy as well, knowing that like schools in the Gulf states on Atlantic seaboard are actively teaching kids about hurricane, that that will be an area where we will aggressively try to distribute to, is to get the book into schools, make it widely available. It'll be a beautiful book, but it's also going to be highly educational. And so Kurt, it's a day-to-day phenomenon. My kids are just so naturally curious. They're asking questions like, what's the strongest kind of hurricane? Is a hurricane stronger than a tornado? Like they're so creative that it's feeding into, I think, the future of where I think this project could go if Cyrena doesn't get too, and Landon don't get too tired.
Never.
Never.
What's that mean?
Yeah. Aren't we?
That's why they have Red Bull. Come on.
24/7, 365. Like, there's no tired in insurance. We're on call all the time.
We're fine.
They're fine. So thinking of it through that lens of kids, there's often a lot of controversy around what we're teaching our kids right now. And yes, I'm going to go there. You're talking about the physics of it, Cyrena. Do you think there's a message of climate change and how that will be received? And does that address some of the things that you could be dealing with when it comes to tornado, when it comes to flood, when it comes to hurricane and things like that? Is the climate change message part of where this could go and what you're trying to convey to kids?
Yeah, it could. I mean, there's no reason Francis Fox, the character of that tells these stories, can't have the climate change story after this. The weather is changing, and that's probably one of the biggest messages that I have in the books always, is that, whether it's good or bad, it doesn't last very long. And there's substantial differences between weather and climate that kids are going to need to learn about. I mean, you hear temperature, you hear pressure, you hear rain or precipitation, and those can be like described in both weather and climate, but they're two very, very different things. Most adults I know don't know the difference between the two. And so there's definitely some room for education in there to explain to them how weather and climate is different, and how those climate changes can affect your weather, and how we measure climate changes and what that can mean. To see in a year, I mean, we're kind of already addressing it a little bit, just in the fact that we think it's so important that this book comes out this year when the hurricane forecast is horrific. We have warmer Atlantic waters than we've ever had before, and we're going to have a La Nina summer, which helps to reduce the wind shear in the Atlantic, which increases hurricane season, right? Like last year we had really warm waters, but an El Nino year, which kind of balanced things out, and it was still incredibly active. I'm not excited about this year. I'm worried. I'm genuinely worried. And so it kind of is the first step the kids are going to get to see in some of those climate change factors. I mean, the number of major hurricanes that are being forecast by all the professional entities, by Colorado State University, by the National Hurricane Center, by Atmospheric G2 and the Weather Company. Everybody's saying that this is going to be a bad year. And so it's going to have to become a part of the conversation, whether we like it or not.
Landon, you've got to find a way to convey an element of seriousness of the imagery in the process and what the message is, and a way of having kids be receptive to it. Is that a step in a different direction for you in terms of what you've done before? Or do you have some past experience with illustration and kids for children and some of that design and thought process that goes into it? Because given the seriousness of the underlying stuff when it comes to the technical things of insurance, it's got to be a very interesting balance when you learn about how the insurance brains and the weather brains think about it, and then go, well, here you go, kids.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, it is kind of a new feeling for me for creating these illustrations for kids. I think some of my inspiration behind it is my own personality is very, even in growing up, my personality, I would console myself by just wanting to understand everything I could about a subject. So I was very just in my head, very logical child, which is interesting for a creative artist to have that kind of personality, but that's how I've always been. And so I would have, growing up, I would have just a massive box of these scientific animal cards, and I would just look at all the scientific names and all the facts on the back of the cards, and that kind of thing would make me not fear, all these scary animals, that kind of thing, because I know them. So I kind of have that power, that control. So I think in a lot of ways, that kind of feeling of wanting to understand something as a kid, like, I know this, I don't need to be afraid of it, kind of thing. I think that is sort of what's behind, what my thought process is like while making these illustrations. So, but in a lot of ways, it is kind of a new thing to need to package this into a children's book format, which is something that I'm doing for the first time. This kind of packaging for children of content like this. So it's been interesting.
Yeah, everything's new, right? And an experience. So who's the target age for the books then? Because that begs the next question I have about it.
That's a tough question. And it was one I wrestled with the weather story as well, because ideally I was trying to really hit that, like, that like 4 to 6, 4 to 8 range initially, because that was the age of my niece. My kids were a little bit younger than that. And that was, I had to, when you like publish a book the first time, when you're like doing the listings on Amazon, it gives you these really small ranges. And I felt like it was selling it short a little. And as the book got out there and got talking to people, I was selling it short. People with 2 and 3-year-olds loved it and were reciting the rhymes in the book and were looking at the pictures and thought it was neat. Every parent and grandparent that read it said, I learned something from that. And doesn't matter where their background was. Kids that were older, that were in like kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, were learning concepts and liking things and reciting things. I had pictures sent to me from Twitter across the United States of kids dressing up like Francis Fox on Halloween, all ages. It's stuff like that where it's like, wow, it's a tremendous range. So it's a really hard question to answer, because these books do something that other books don't, and that they are explaining technical concepts in different ways. And it has information out there that is factual, but in a way that your grandmother can understand. And that gives it a range.
And that's really important. And I think, Nick, to the insurance part of this, there's also, it's a spread of education where maybe we are not deliberately ignorant, but we're just inadvertently uninformed about the difference between weather and climate. We're not thinking about how the underlying risk models of why can't I get home insurance in Florida, Louisiana, and California right now. All those things are helping parents who may, like, we know this. We've been in this industry forever. Even the people we think are our best clients rarely think about insurance. But this helps them understand why those things they experience in their day-to-day life may be affecting their insurance, and they're teaching their kids about it. You're playing the long game, aren't you? Like, in 30 years, we just need better insurance clients. But it is helping getting a different message across, and I think that's valuable, or at least I'm assuming it is.
Yeah, I mean, that I am playing the long game here. That the book itself is not specifically an insurance book, but it is to educate. We believe that we can be better insurance professionals if we understand how natural catastrophes work, right? To Cyrena's point about, grandmothers learning something about the book. I mean, how many people know that these raindrops that occur that kind of condense and form these clouds are these microscopic sand particles, right? The way Landon illustrates this with the magnifying glass in one of the pages, right? I am convinced that almost every adult that's a non-meteorologist that sees that is going to be like, oh, I didn't know that. I sort of vaguely knew it, but I saw it and I'm like, oh yeah, like that's true, right? And I'm supposed to really know this stuff as an insurance professional. So the way Cyrena carefully crafted the poetry, right, around the particular book, and And the way that Landon illustrates this is just gorgeous, right? And it is the long game. It is. This will be a tool, Pete and Kurt, out of many tools. We have others on. We'll have others that come after this, but I think one of the things that we can do at Insurance Nerds to train and support the next generation of insurance professionals is to reach them earlier, right? And so, we've been joking around, like, what's the age group for this? And I truly think it's going to be kids sitting on mom's lap or dad's lap, getting the book read to them. Then they re-engage with the book when they're learning how to read and they want to be independent, right? Then they're going to be teenagers. Then they're not really going to care, right? But then they're going to pick up the book again as they get older and they become parents again. It has a potential to kind of cycle through, to be like a perpetual seller over and over again. And so it is the long game. This is what we're betting on. And the Insurance Nerds bet here is that this could be a way to reach younger people. And we have to, and from an insurance perspective, we have to reach younger people. We're testing this mechanism out.
Nick, that's interesting. And you said earlier you had found Cyrena's first book and was reading it to your children.
Mm-hmm.
And Cyrena, you mentioned that, to get this out and the process of getting it out and the use of Amazon. Could you sort of dive into that a little more for our listeners? Because again, like, this was something I learned a couple of years ago, is how powerful it is today to have Amazon, so that people like yourselves, the three of you, can actually get this into a really high scale distribution model where it didn't really exist before. Like, you had to, I couldn't even assume what it took to peddle a book around North America to all these bookstores. Like, you can imagine the logistics. And today, you set up these variables, you go on a website, you partner with smart people like, say, Nick here, who's going to take it into sort of an area of insurance. But that concept of what it takes to get the book out and what you can use by the tools that you've obviously crafted, how do you find that helps?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey, to be honest, right? So it's like, I never thought I'd be a children's book author. I never thought I'd be an author at all. And so when the idea came about to do this, I found there were two main roads you could do. You could self-publish or have a publisher. Well, little old me in the very beginning didn't have a publisher. And you write to a couple people with some ideas, but they get thousands of inquiries a day. So what's that going to mean? And there were pros and cons to it as well. If you get a publisher, you might lose what, like, you illustrate or what you do, or they may want to change the story and they just buy the rights to it and they do what they want with it. And then it's back to another weather book on the shelf like everything else. So for the first one, I self-published it. And having all those things in hand, it was really important for me to have like an Amazon and online distribution, because there's a lot of places, not just Amazon, but a lot of anywhere online books are sold. The Barnes and Nobles, Barnes and Nobles, Walmart's, Target, all that have online print distribution, which means all you have to do is they have to have the digital file and they can print it on demand and ship it out. That is just a completely new way of doing things. And so it was really important for me to have that, because it was me, myself, and I didn't have a marketing team. I didn't have a budget. It was one person who wrote and illustrated this book and was trying to get it out to as many people as I can. And I did a pretty good job by myself, but being able to pair with Nick instead and the resources he sees, I mean, I was like bootstrapping it. But that was still much better doing it the Amazon way than having to go around to bookstores. Now, there were a few I hoofed around on foot that were local anyway, just to get it in some local places. But the main distribution was definitely online, without question. And so I was the marketing department of one. I was like everything. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this works now, because I'm just so fortunate to have this team, to have Landon illustrating, to have Nick in his knowledge. And it's going to be a different distribution model than what I had before. And I think it's going to make it so much successful and give it such a broader reach than what I was able to have with the first book. So I don't even know what's coming, to be honest. And that's really exciting.
Yeah.
And how did you find, under the first model, how did you find the digital piece? Like, we're all Kindle family. Like what? And I don't have little kids anymore. My kids are all much bigger. But what are the little kids doing when it comes to the whole digital adoption using Kindles and stuff? Or is it still they prefer to order it and have it show up like a week later? So like the story Nick told, or it's like the parents sitting on their kids sitting on their parent lap. Like I don't really see many grandparents holding a Kindle, and it just kind of loses it. But maybe that's what's going to happen. Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe someday. No, that wasn't the sales. It was, it was David and Goliath. Digital sales were nothing. I had a digital version up there that you could buy that was easy, that went on Kindle, and I jumped through all the hoops to do that. But it was a fraction of a fraction. 1/100%, maybe.
It's not the same. It's not the same.
Yeah.
Kurt. It's
nope.
So there's an emotional bond and connection that occurs when a parent or someone is reading a book to a child. And frankly, when we've been talking to different printers, and we're talking, there's just an emotional bond with the book. Like there are certain books where I just want to touch the book. Like there's something about the way the cover feels, the way the paper feels, kind of, when I'm filing it through my fingers, there's an emotional connection to the book. And I think ultimately that's what we're striving for here. We've even decided, like early on, we were going to go soft cover on the book to get it into more hands and make it more economical. But we've since backtracked because there's something special about a child's hardcover book that we decided, okay, we're going for the emotional bond. We have to hit that.
Yeah, funny you say that. The doctor
says very important thing, right? Aspect.
Yeah.
We'll go soft cover, but I just don't expect like an ebook experience for a children's book to be the same way. And that's why someone like Landon is extremely important to this process, because he's essentially digitizing much of it. So while I don't think ebook is going to be valuable directly, I do think some sort of animation is ultimately a direction we would want to go in. And I'm not talking like anything crazy like a cartoon, although we've discussed that. But kids are getting tablets sooner. So while I don't think the ebook is the direction, I do think an animation with like YouTube Kids or something like that is absolutely a direction. And if our goal is to educate this next generation, then we have to meet them where they are. Right. So part of it will be book, right? And that bonding that occurs, but part of it will be animation as well, and the potential scaling of the learning experience.
And waterproof. Sorry, Pete. I have to throw waterproof in because it's about hurricanes. Sorry, this is bad insurance joke. Come on.
But there's a large runway in where you can go with this once you sort of figure out where the traction is. You can gamify the content. You can incentivize it too, about understanding things. Like when we grew up, and now I'm going to really date myself, everyone had a plan on how do you get out of the second floor of your house if there's a fire, right? Maybe you had a rope with knots in it and you knew where you were going to tie it up. I don't think those conversations happen anymore, but it would make sense that when a hurricane hits or a tornado hits or an earthquake hits, there's a plan. And Francis Fox is going to help sort of navigate that, right? And that's a big thing. I mean, right now, and I don't know if you ever read this article. It came out about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even longer. It was in the New Yorker. It was called The Big One. And it's about the impending earthquake that could hit anywhere from Northern California up to the middle of British Columbia. And in there's a really interesting thing. And what they did was they did all these core samples. And I'm just going to summarize this because it leads back to a children's story. But they found correlated data in Japan who were writing down history. But on the west coast of North America, the First Nations populations didn't record anything. It was stories. So they found a First Nation that talked about how an event happened and water came in and their canoes were at the top of trees. Like really simple stuff, but it was oral history. And they told these stories. And in the First Nations in Canada in particular, and that's all I can really relate to, is the oral history is so important in how they educate and move forward and talk about everything that had happened in the past. And if you know anything about the history in Canada and North America, when it comes to First Nations, they actually taught the Europeans how to farm. Like they knew how to farm, but they didn't know how to farm over here. And it was the First Nations who sort of who told them, didn't write anything down, and showed them. And I always come back to this idea that the story has a more powerful resonance to kids and people because it can be believed, right? And then you have this, as you said, Nick, a bond to it, right? And that makes it important. What does that look like when you start tackling other, let's call them perils, or other climate or weather events? Have you got plans for these stories and where it can go? Because I mean, obviously earthquake seems like an obvious one to me, and same with tornadoes, because there's things that you can do in the event when those hit that are very important to saving lives and being careful.
Cyrena?
It's a very good question.
Yeah, no, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if it was Nick or me.
I do this all the time.
So I absolutely agree with the power of story. And thought it was a really important part of the first book that I did, the weather story. And so there's two parts that kids repeat to me constantly. And every time they do, I wish they knew how much it made my heart flutter inside, because it's like the most touching and amazing thing. So when there's two lines in the book, the first one is, rainy, cloudy, windy days mean low pressure's on the way. And so the second a storm blows through, the second that picks up and it starts raining and it's windy, my kids, when they were little, would run through the house. Low pressure's on the way. Low pressure's on the way. And we'd be running up and down the stairs. And it's like, these kids understand a fundamental meteorological concept that most adults don't. And that's really cute. The second one is a little bit more important in that lightning safety is really critical. And I actually wanted to hit on that and make sure it was included in the weather story. And there's a really important rule called the 30-30 rule. And that is 30 minutes. So you're watching a storm, you see lightning. 30 minutes after you see the last flash of lightning, you wait 30 seconds after you see the flash of lightning, hear the thunder. You wait 30 more minutes. You hear how confusing this is? And that's when it's safe to go outside again. And it's like, okay, how in the heck can we teach kids that this is safe? Because lightning actually strikes out the back of thunderstorms more frequently than the front. And people frequently get hit by lightning by going outside too soon before the storm's over. You're actually better off cutting it close as it's moving in. But people do the opposite. So I really wanted to include that. And so there's a line in the weather story that I boiled it down to: you should not go outside until the storm is out of sight. Simple, gets the message across. And I want kids to realize those clouds need to be gone. They need to be out of the way where you don't see them anymore before it's safe to go outside for lightning. And that one gets repeated frequently. And it makes me so happy because I've heard in these little tiny kid voices, with like the 4-year-old little like speech impediments they all have, right, as they're learning their words. You should not go outside again until the storm is out of sight. And every time I just want to high five them because that's such a critical safety concept. And it's shared through story, all through the power of story. Just a clever little rhyme may keep their lives safe.
Yeah, I think you need to hang out at pro shops at golf courses.
Oh my God.
'Cause I
Three
know a
copies
lot
of
of
the weather
golfers,
story.
know a lot of golfers that don't wait till the storm's gone away. So,
No, they don't. And that's where you're going to get yourself in trouble.
This is it. Yeah, this is where you get hit, right? Like, yeah, that's wild. Yeah, good to know. 30 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
So just sit up there in the restaurant for 30 extra minutes. Okay.
Get a drink, man.
That's a tough
Have a
one.
beverage.
Yeah, have another beer, I guess.
Yeah.
Think
darn.
of
How about lemonade?
think of the different perils where, like lightning, additionally, where kids could get scared and you don't have a lot of time. So tornadoes, Pete, you brought that up. Wildfires, right? So
Oh yeah.
when it's time and you need to evacuate, like, and you need to get out of there, like people die in wildfires. They leave too late, right? Or they drive into the wildfire. Like it can get crazy. Earthquakes, right? So while not a climate phenomenon, there's still that aspect of it around when it's happening. What do you do, right? And there are things you need to do because how do people generally get injured during earthquakes is things fall on them, right? So it's the duck and cover kind of phenomenon that you have to occur. You don't want to be necessarily running outside either, because glass will break and things will fall on top of you, right? So what do you do during those things? They're critical story, not just story, Pete, but a well done story just makes such a difference. Like we now have so much evidence in this digital realm when you see like the amazing stuff that Pixar and these like digital outfits have done and what they do. And I can hear my kids talking about stuff. They talk about things from the perspective of The Incredibles, or remember when this happened in Wall-E, right? Stories, right?
Yeah.
Like take those simple concepts and their curiosity will make them want to learn more. They're not going to stop at the microscopic sand particle that creates the drop. They're going to want to know more. They're going to want to know why, right? Like why does that happen? You know, and my kids have been asking questions around like, why does the raindrop stay in a ball? You know, why doesn't it come down like it does in the tub, right? So Cyrena's got a lot of work to do. As long as she's not tired and she can keep pumping out poetry, it's we'll have to figure out how to get Landon get a body double. I believe he has a brother.
Yeah, he's basically body double.
So Landon, let's talk about that. You take Cyrena's concepts and obviously she and Nick have kind of pulled some things together here to tie into the climate weather facets and the science and then the underlying insurance stuff. Does that help you sort of get your creative brain going of where this could take it? And are you sort of going, okay, I may not work in insurance. I may not know a lick about the weather other than when I look out the door. But now that I've sort of gotten to know Francis Fox, are you thinking of other characters? Are you thinking of other ways to bring this information forward that maybe wasn't there when you started on this project?
You know, I think honestly, I'm thinking of because we've talked about, you know, all these different topics that we can cover. You know, I honestly haven't thought of anything besides, you know, keep making sure Francis Fox is a character that I'm going to be, you know, I want to make Francis have a personality and feel, you know, what's the word? Just be a constant, you know, in these other books and other things that may or may not, you know, be upcoming for Francis. But I don't know. I think I'm just kind of taking it as it comes and keeping in mind that there are many things that Francis knows about in regards to the weather and a lot of other ways that the character can be. You know, I'm having fun with putting Francis in all these different kinds of hats and things. So that's been pretty fun. But yeah, I'm keeping my mind open for whatever, you know, Cyrena thinks up with these, other weather phenomenon. So,
well, Landon, let's put Francis on a surfboard, because I live where it's quake, hurricane, and tsunami zone. So, so we do have kids here that, you know, they shuttle the kids out of school into a high-rise building that's very secure. And so, yeah, you know, I think they all wait to see Francis come by on a surfboard one day, because the thought is that, you know, we had a 7.8 here and the thought was that it was going to generate a wave, and it didn't, thankfully. But there's an illustration for you, and it's so I love the story behind all of this, guys. It's super powerful, and getting you on to talk about it, what a thrill. So, Nick, thanks for reaching out to us and getting this together. When will the next book hit, and how do we find the first book? So if anyone's listening to this now and says, I want to dive in early, where do we find the first one? Is it on Amazon, I assume?
Yep, the first one is on Amazon right now. We're going to be bringing that one under this umbrella too, though, and kind of doing a re-release of that, which is coming. And then otherwise, the hurricane story is going to be ready June 1st, first day of hurricane season.
Okay, and is it under your name, or like do you have a pen name that you go by? That's some
No, just
some
no,
writers
just
use like an alias, like Nick does. Yeah.
yeah. No, that's what Frances Fox is. That's who she is. She's my alias. No, but no. So it's
Okay.
by me, Cyrena Arnold, meteorologist Cyrena Arnold, and and we'll have Landon on there as the illustrator, and it's going to be a cool thing.
Yeah,
I love
Kurt.
it.
For this one, it will not. The weather story currently is on Amazon. We are going to republish it as well, so that folks can get the bundled version.
Makes sense.
And
Yeah.
get them in a sleeve. I think that's also a bonding experience as well. My kids, my kids have book series as well, and they love like the little cardboard box that it comes in. They can neatly organize it. We are standing up a landing page for the hurricane story and the weather story bundle. And so what'll happen is it won't immediately be available on Amazon. We'll do a pre-order starting in May as well. Folks can
And that's with
pre-order
the
it.
Insurance Nerds, right?
Yes.
That's for you guys'
Yeah.
website. So check that out. Friends of the podcast,
Yes.
Insurance Nerds. Check out their website because you can get this.
It will be the hurricanestory.com. So we've got the domain, but the landing page is not up, and we're shooting for May 1st to have the landing page up, and that's where we'll take the pre-orders. Right now we are in the process of reaching out to insurance professionals and meteorological professionals as well, and getting their feedback on the book and making that available. But we expect shipments to go out on the first day of hurricane season.
That's amazing and great timing. But hey, this has been super fun. I don't honestly, when you sort of hit us with the idea, I was like, well, this could be kind of fun and clever. It's actually been super fun, like, and really interesting. Like, it went into places that I didn't think we'd talk about. And I can tell you right now, there's a lot more happening at the Insurance Nurse HQ than there is at the Insurance Podcast HQ when it comes to projects and creativity. I'm a little awestruck, to tell you the honest truth. It's great stuff. And I think, this more out of the box kind of thinking is going to really help the industry long term. And it's nice to know, Nick, that you've putting some effort and time and energy into things that are long game in this industry, rather than hoping we can quick fix it, which has traditionally been the way to do things in insurance. Is long game, slow incremental changes make a bigger impact down the road. And I think this will. So Cyrena, Landon, Nick, thanks so much for joining us. We can't wait to get your story out, and let's see where the adventures of Frances Fox go.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.